Welcome to this series of videos on the types of start. This is a brief video to introduce the types of starts used in athletics. Starting well is vital, as it can set the tone of your race and may often determine how the whole race will go. Clearly, this becomes more important as we decrease the distance that we are running. For example, we have less time to reach our maximum speed in a short sprint compared to a marathon, which is obviously run at a much slower pace. Evidently, we don't need to use blocks to start a marathon, although that would be fun to see, but it is useful to know how to get an efficient start in all races. The start used for these longer races is a standing start. This start can be either slow and easy, or it can be very explosive if maximal speed work is the objective in training. The standing start is the most basic start. Step up to the line with one foot forwards and the other about 50 centimeters back. Have the opposite arm forwards to the front leg. Push off both feet and start running. Make sure you keep steady because you don't want to fall over before you've even started. The next type of start is a crouch start. This is more commonly used for the sprints and is a good introductory exercise to teach kids how to sprint. It involves kneeling down into a crouched position, which will help you to be explosive and achieve maximum speed as fast as possible. We will cover how to get into this position in a later video. Before you sprint, raise up your hips so your legs become less bent. This is also known as the set position. This allows you to push off quickly and get a fast start. Younger age group athletes will tend to use this start in their races. There is another start which is very similar to the crouch one, but is not used very frequently. It's called the 3-point start. The reason for this is that the crouch start we have 4 points of contact with the ground, both hands and both feet. The 3-point start involves lifting up one of the hands. You're not allowed to use this start in a normal sprint race, such as 100 meters, and it's best to use a normal 4-point start then anyway. You may have seen this used in the 4x1 relay, as it allows for an explosive start without using blocks. In the relay, the 3-point start allows us to look under our arm to see when the incoming runner is approaching. Finally, the last type of start we have is a block start. This is a little more complicated and requires more strength and speed to use them properly. We recommend that athletes under the age of 14 don't really need to be using them, and won't gain significant advantage from doing so. In fact, the more complicated moves may even make them a little slower. Using blocks is similar to a crouch start, so it is important to perfect the crouch start before moving on to blocks. In this video, we're going to have a look at how to do a standing start. Initially, we have one foot behind the line and the other foot about 30 to 50 centimeters further back than that. If you're not sure how to choose which foot to have forwards or which feels more comfortable, it is normally best to have your kicking foot, i.e. the one you'd kick a football or rugby ball with, as your back foot in the starting position. Bend at the hips, not in your lower back, to create a forward lean for the angle of drive out from the start, and bend your legs a little, roughly so the front leg is about 120 degrees. Get your arms in the correct position, with the opposite arm forwards to the leg that is at the front. Also, try to create a good angle with the arms to allow for a good arm drive. As you start, drive the arms and extend through to triple point flexion. This may sound complicated, but essentially it means to get your leg straight and extended through the hip, knee and ankle. We are aiming to get our foot landing behind our hip on each of the first 2 to 3 steps in order to generate acceleration. This means we try to drive our hips forwards and just pull our foot back underneath us on each stride. In this video we're going to have a look at how to do a crouch start. Generally these are used by youngsters when they start in athletics, but can be used by athletes of all ages. Initially we need to work out which way round we're going to have our feet. Generally, the foot that we like to kick a ball with will be our back foot, and the other one, our stance foot, will be the front foot. Put the front foot just behind the line and measure back 1.5 foot lengths. Once we have the front foot 1.5 foot lengths back from the starting line, we then keep it where it is. We kneel down so that the other knee is side by side with the front foot with a small gap in between. Curl the back toe under on the back foot so that we get as many of our spikes into the track as possible. Place our hands just over shoulder width apart on the floor just behind the starting line, resting on our fingers. This creates a good starting position so that when we go into the set on the order of the starter, all we have to do is keep our arms upright and raise up until we get a right angle at the front knee. The placement of the back foot in a crouch start is slightly further forward than in a block start. This is because we need to make sure that we have the appropriate angles for the surface we're pushing against, with the block start clearly being on an incline. With the foot slightly further forward, i.e. with the toes and knee lined up, we get the optimal angle to push against the floor in order to start quickly. Here we have a few demonstrations of athletes running from blocks. They are only included to demonstrate some of the technical points we actually want to use when we're doing a crouch start as well. It is worth noting that in the on your marks and set position, we want to make sure that our head stays down and relaxed on our shoulders, and that our back is straight. This allows for maximum force to be applied into the ground. A big arch in our back, or sticking our head up to see where we are going, will create tensions and weakness that will not help us to start as fast as we possibly can. When the starter fires his gun, we drive the arms hard and push against the floor with our legs. The idea in the first few strides is to push hard whilst gradually bringing our body upright. On each step we are looking for our foot to land behind our hips so that we are always pushing against something to drive our body forwards. After about 3 to 4 strides we should be in a full running action, even if we are still leaning forwards a bit. We will look at the mechanics of what we do in the first few steps in future videos. In this video we're going to look at a 3-point start. The starting position is similar to that of a standing crouch or block start, i.e. we have one foot behind the other. This is a start that is commonly used for relays, as it allows us to look behind us and see when the incoming runner is approaching, but still maintain a low body position so we can accelerate hard. The distance back from the line will vary very slightly, but is generally fairly similar to a crouch start, with your feet slightly closer together than they would be for blocks. Put the arm of the forward foot behind you, quite a long way behind you, so that you can throw it forwards hard when you take your first step. Create an angle of about 90 degrees in the front knee, and if you've got your feet placed correctly, this will create an angle of about 120 degrees in the back knee. Extend at the hips, knee and ankle as fast as you can to push your hips as far forward as possible. This is triple point extension. When our first foot contacts the ground, we should be landing with our foot behind our hips. This should be repeated for the first few steps before we rise up from the drive phase, where our foot will begin to land beneath us. If you cannot get your foot to land behind your hips, the force you apply into the ground will be pushing you backwards instead of forwards, therefore slowing you down. The 3-point start will help to emphasise the arm drive, since it is primed to drive through at the start. Comparing the 3-point start to the conventional 4-point or crouch start, we can see the angles are all the same and the only difference is the arm position. Having the arm up in the set position will help to drive it through with more force. We use blocks to get an explosive start in order to minimise the time taken to achieve maximum velocity. When setting up blocks, place the central component 1 foot length away from the line. Once you've decided which your front foot is going to be, place this block so the base of the block pad is 2 footsteps away from the line. Place the back block a further footstep away, so it is 3 pigeon steps away from the starting line. In each of these cases, it is okay to have the foot about 1/4 to 1/2 foot length further back if you feel more comfortable with this. These settings, however, make a good starting point in terms of having your blocks in the correct position. The central component has spikes on the underside, so make sure to push these spikes into the ground to maintain traction. The blocks should be set at their lowest level, i.e. lowest angle compared to the track, as this provides the greatest stretch in the Achilles, which will help with the power production off the blocks. If you think of your Achilles as being like an elastic band, the greater the stretch in it in the starting position, the greater the power generated off the blocks. There is a debate as to whether the foot should be on the plate or just slightly away from it. Again, this will probably depend on the athlete's strength. In an ideal world, a slight gap would be best, as this would allow for a stretch shortening cycle to occur. However, if the athlete isn't strong enough, this may result in too much backwards motion at the point of the gun firing and cause us to be delayed in our push-off. The other issue which may be considered is whether or not we have our toe on the ground or just above it. If the toe is on the ground, this will provide a further stretch in both the plantar fascia and Achilles, allowing for greater reaction off the blocks. However, for comfort, a lot of people prefer to have their toe just above the floor, in which case this is not going to make a significant difference if this is more comfortable. In this video, we're going to have a look at what we should do in the set position and also for the first 2 steps out of the blocks. In the set position, we are looking for a number of key angles and positions to ensure that we're in the most powerful position to start. If the blocks are set up correctly, which we covered in a previous video, then going into the set position we are looking to get 90 degrees in the front leg at the knee. If this works correctly, then the back leg will be approximately 120 degrees. Our arms should be vertical and just over shoulder width apart. We should be on our fingers, so our shoulders are a touch higher than they would otherwise be, rather than the palms of our hands. With the vertical arms, this is so that we can create a good pressure into the blocks. We are not leaning forwards or backwards. As a general rule, we should aim to have our feet pressed flat against the blocks, so that when the gun goes there will be no backwards movement. If an athlete is particularly strong, then occasionally it's desirable to have a very small gap to allow for a bit of extra stretch shortening in the Achilles between the heel and the block. The stretch shortening cycle is the process whereby energy is created and stored in our muscles and tendons when they're stretched. If this is used quickly and released, it then springs back and provides forward momentum to what we are doing. However, this is only advisable for the very strong and elite athlete. Also, we should be looking for our back to be straight in the set position so that we have no arch, as this allows for a more powerful push-off. This position is very similar to that of a squat. Our back needs to remain straight in a squat to keep our core and torso strong and stable. This same principle applies in the start. The last thing to look for is to keep our heads neutral on our shoulders, i.e. we don't bend them down or up. We're not looking at where we're going or looking at our feet, but trying to maintain a nice relaxed position. The aim of the start is to get max speed as fast as possible. In the first couple of steps there are a few key factors which apply to both of them. However, obviously, the first step is about using the blocks to get the maximum push forwards that we can. To do this, we need to get our hips and therefore our centre of mass as far forward as possible in the first few steps. This allows us to get our feet underneath us and apply force behind us, propelling our bodies forwards. If our feet land in front of our hips, this applies a slight braking force, slowing us down. Fully extend at the front leg, achieving triple point extension through the hip, knee and ankle. Simultaneously, the back leg should drive through fast. From this position, the aim is to get the foot landing behind the centre of mass. Pull the back foot down and back as fast as possible in a thigh popping action. When the foot lands behind the centre of mass, this applies the force behind the athlete and therefore propels them forwards. Most athletes will fully extend our legs into triple point flexion, which means the full extension of the ankle, knee and hip. However, extremely strong athletes can stop before this and get into the next step. We then repeat this process for the second step, although our body will be at a slightly more vertical angle. This commences the transition from our start into our full running action. When looking at a sprint race, we need to split it into three parts: the start, the transition and the top end speed at the end. The first part of this is the concentric movement of powering out of the blocks. Essentially, we almost try to jump out of them. This requires muscle movements which are contractions very similar to that we would use when lifting weights, for example squatting in the gym. We push out and try to make sure that our feet stay nice and low so that we can then put the foot forward and pull it back underneath our hips so that our foot landing is behind the hip, able to push us into the next step. When we're running at full speed, the feet will actually land just in front of the hips. The heel will recover more to the backside and we'll lift our knees higher to get the downforce we need to create the plyometric effect on the floor. That is the stretch shortening cycle. This now allows us to maintain speed for a longer period of time rather than essentially trying to accelerate across the entire race. The transition is exactly that. It is a transition between these two different types of way of running, and one that we must do smoothly in order to make it as efficient as possible without jerking from one point of the acceleration to the next point of maintaining top end speed. Essentially, we can think of the first two steps as being the start, and the next 8 to 10 will be the transition into a full running action. It may be slightly more or less than this for some athletes. Generally, the stronger athletes will take a little longer to get to the full running action, whilst younger athletes will do this a little quicker. On each step we'll see a gradual lifting of the upper body so that the angle of this to the track gets nearer to 90 degrees and we're standing more upright. Gradually there will be more flexion at the knee as the focus of the drive becomes less horizontal and more vertical. Once we are up to full speed, the forces acting on us are essentially vertical. This is because the biggest force acting on us is gravity. And at this point is why we're trying to force our foot back down into the floor to accelerate and stop our body collapsing. The back end of the race will be about maintenance of this top end speed, and often it is the athlete that decelerates the least that is going to win. This is true even in a 100-metre race. In this video we're going to have a look at a 10-point checklist for starting with blocks. First of all, make sure you stamp your blocks into the ground so they're nice and secure. Having your blocks slip can be a catastrophe in a race. Next, make sure you get the blocks in the correct position. Then you measure 2 and 3 foot lengths back, or a little bit further, to get the actual blocks in the correct position. Keep your arms vertical when you're in the set position. This enables you to get into the right position to push off hard. When in the set position, get your front leg at 90 degrees. This should ensure that your back leg is about 120 and ready to fire you down the track. Make sure you push off both blocks hard at the start of the race to get the quickest start possible. The back foot will come off the blocks slightly before the front foot, but still get some good push with this one before extending the front leg. Pop your back leg through, keeping the foot nice and low to the ground in order to get the most direct line through your body, in order to then push back into the track and land with your foot behind your hips. This will be true on the first and second steps. In order to assist this, make sure you throw your arms nice and wide on the first couple of steps. This will help propel your hips forward and mean that your foot lands behind them. Once we've brought our foot through, it will then push back into the ground to create the angles we are looking for into the first step. Effectively, both our shins should be at roughly the same angle upon landing. This allows the force to be applied forwards. The mechanics of the first step are repeated on step 2, and then to a lesser extent on further steps after that, as we gradually transition into our full speed running. When we reach full speed, we will be standing more upright and driving the knees higher in order to create more impact down into the ground rather than backwards as we accelerate on the first couple of steps. Thanks for watching. Please have a look at some of our other videos and subscribe to our channel to see our future ones. To find out more information about Momentum Sports, have a look at our website and social media pages found in the description below.